Hello again. I just wanted to pop in here and remind you that this episode is a continuation of the last one. So if you haven't heard the first part yet, I recommend you do that before starting this one. I'll add the link in the show notes. And if you, dear listener, enjoy the show, please consider supporting it via Patreon. I cannot continue without your support and new patrons coming in. Listeners like you make this show possible. Now, on to part 2.
Make sure that that program doesn't contain controversial subjects and you're not impolite to people.
No, definitely not, Dad. You know me. I'm never, ever controversial or impolite.
Yeah. Okay.
Welcome to Conversations with your lovable, never pisses anyone off, ex-Muslim host Aina. Keeping it non-controversial. Peterson's griftiness it's just so blatant. Like he
sells that stupid painting of his, like that meaning of music he was making. He was going to make like custom made like carpets? Floor mats that he was going to sell. I mean, like it's just no shame.
Yeah, he sells rugs.
Yeah, it's just.
I mean, I would like to do some research into the grievances that we're talking about here, but I've just been so heavily reinforced that, like, any attempt to study grievances is hugely problematic. Like, maybe we shouldn't ever talk about any of the wrong things. I mean, like, it just gets silly after a while. Like, and I think that especially the Sokol hoax folks do a poor job of clarifying whether they mean it's wrong to study the nature of gender or whether they mean these particular fields need reform in their open conversation about specific theories. I'm actually... The one thing I am optimistic about in this is the coming article, the Journal for Controversial Ideas. I think that's actually an excellent game changer for our view of things for the most part, which is that it's going to force them to put up or shut up.
Wait, like seriously? You're looking forward to this?
I'm genuinely on board about this because one of two things is going to happen.
An anonymous academic journal?
Yeah, either one of two things is going to happen, right? Either someone's going to publish some incredible ground-changing, fundamentally important data in this journal, and we're all going to look at it, and then we're going to use it and gain knowledge. Or no one's going to publish anything useful in it, and it's going to be filled with a bunch of really terrible stuff, thereby confirming that there are not a bunch of secret, brilliant ideas that are being suppressed by all of academia that couldn't come forward because people were afraid of losing their careers.
These people that complain about losing their careers and are some of the most celebrated people making these expensive events with $500 tickets, given platforms in the New York Times and things like that.
That's, one of the clearer things that's happened is you see the people with the biggest platforms complaining about being deplatformed. But also, to Aaron's point, I mean, we already have essentially the Journal of Controversial Ideas in various forms out there that frequently publish pseudonymous entries from people who claim the mob has gone after them. And all and if anything, these have shown that there aren't really any new and exciting ideas. They just publish the exact same article 50 different times that all say the exact same thing. I'm a brilliant novelist, and the only reason that my novel wasn't picked up by the biggest trade press in the United States is because of social justice warriors. Or I'm a brilliant comedian, but the only reason I can't book any gigs is because I made a joke about black people, or something like this. And so I think the second of Aaron's two scenarios will probably play out with the Journal of Controversial Ideas. But who knows? Maybe, they'll finally come up with a theory of everything, which I guess wouldn't be controversial anyway. But
if it's the Journal of Ironic Grievance Studies, I'm happy. Like, I'm happy either way. This is a win-win. I just sit back and wait for the winning.
There's no winning with these people because they're not consistent or principled or self-aware. So they will easily go into that without noticing or acknowledging the irony and not acknowledging when they're proven wrong. I mean, Sokol himself came and said that the original penis hoax did not do what it claimed to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there was
it's hard work changing disciplines. There's lots of models. If you look at the history of university disciplines, there's lots of models of how it has happened. It can happen from the inside. It can also happen from related disciplines. Like there's a whole branch.
But you have to engage in
philosophy
good faith.
Of science. Exactly.
At the very least,
it happens all around us. It happens from people inside disciplines and from people outside those disciplines who engage in conversations with the disciplines that they're trying to have an impact on. But it is hard work. You have to find a way to talk to those people whose work you want to change, and the hooks like that. It's not
just like how they say, right? Like if you want to reach out to these Trump supporters or whatever, calling them racist is only going to make them more racist, but that never extends the other way, right? It's totally okay to hurl abuse and hate and mock and ridicule and call racist SJWs, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what if what if that turns them further to the left? Nobody's writing sympathetic New York Times opinion pieces on this. Some of the takes from these IDW types are like excruciating, like that, climate change denial and Holocaust denial is the same thing. Then there's this Eric Weinstein take. It's time to level with millennials. You guys know all that quote-unquote woke stuff you guys talk about, the stuff you're using to tear apart millennia of oppression and or civilization? It was all made up about 20 minutes ago, and then he, tweets this graph where, certain terms that he searched did not exist in conversation before a certain time.
I'll continue to be amazed that either Weinstein is famous, to be honest with you. After Eric Weinstein said that string theory was postmodern, and then after his brother Brett goes on about the rationalism of the Third Reich, it's just they're kind of, I see them like the IDW, like especially the Weinsteins, as it's kind of like the Kardashians of the right, in the sense that they're just famous for being famous now, and so maybe Brett Weinstein is a good biologist. I wouldn't know, because none of the stuff that he says that he claims to base on his biological knowledge is any good. And so, but now just because he is in the IDW and his brother's in the IDW, they're sort of go-to authorities on subjects that they clearly don't have any idea about. And so, again, I see them that's famous because they're famous in that circle. So I'm going to stick with that. The Kardashians of Twitter.
There's no depth to their points or criticisms, like just the idea that because people weren't talking about the term LGBTQ or other terms, 50, 60, 80 years ago, doesn't mean that kind of oppression didn't exist just because we didn't have the current term, the current language to describe it.
I think they suffer from something that a lot of academics
Dunning-Kruger?
Well, yeah, but also just that, when you're trying to continue to hold people's attention, right? You have to keep putting out new takes on various things. Maybe you don't, right? Maybe you can just be the sort of person who makes the exact same take over and over. But I feel like there's an urge to get outside of your lane sort of more and more to get sort of your name recognized in more conversations. Yeah. But it's just hard to know nearly enough of the things you need to know to have a decent take on a lot of these things. And so you often see people really making mistakes when they even move from related fields and try to sort of speak as experts.
And that's a great point. And I struggle with it, certainly. I have, as you know, lots of opinions about lots of things, and some of them I'm an expert on, and lots of them I'm not. But the problem is when their kind of expertise is used as a legitimizer for all of their takes. So if you're an expert on evolutionary biology, all of a sudden you have more gravitas when you're talking about immigration policy or something. And that's, I think, a failure of journalism as much as it's a failure of they themselves personally. Because, and it happens to me too. I'm sometimes, asked for comment on certain things that I have no more expertise. I just mouth off about it on Twitter.
Yeah.
If you're asking me about classical Greek history, I actually might know more than most people. But that expertise shouldn't necessarily translate into respect automatically in other fields.
Mm-hmm.
Have you heard this Eric Weinstein take? There are about 5K mammalian species. We're the only one with permanently swollen breasts. Breasts being sexy is essential to being human. This is why STEM PhDs are confused about why all MDs and therapists are honored with the term quote-unquote doctor without additional scientific training. Now he's responding to or quoting a doctor who had said something. It was over the top, if I remember correctly.
If you're ever trying to not have sexy thoughts, thinking about Eric Weinstein talking about swollen breasts might do it for you. But I just...
But she said something like, "Don't sexualize breasts. Breasts aren't sexual," or something like that. And so he went the other way, saying that them being sexual is essential to being human, which is
that's
also
an evergreen tweet. That is right there.
It's so ridiculous because I mean, I guess gay men don't exist.
Well, so should we rope that into breasts at the workplace are a reason why men and women can't work together? Is that
right? That
is that where this is going?
That's another genius IDW take from Peterson.
They're so quick to bow to nature, and this is another sort of philosophical thing that I take issue with their whole view.
Even.
Well, right, but even if we concede for the sake of make more than just the awkwardness of thinking about him thinking about breasts, right? Let's have a conversation about the fact that their arguments always take a form of this is biological and biological is largely unchangeable. So stop applying culture to try to force people to be different. But that's just not the way any of this works. Biology is quite mutable, and it is changed radically in the past 40,000 years as a result of culture. Right. So to say we shouldn't do this because it's hard is just a lazy sort of we've clearly been able to domesticate ourselves as a species very effectively. So I'm not sure why we have to stop right at this particular moment in history.
But it's all in the same person a lot of the time. So it's these folks, it's Steven Pinker, that just worship at the altar of their version of the Enlightenment, which would be as kind of cultural as anything else, and then at the same time revert to biological determinism and say that everybody who isn't a biological determinist is some kind of blank slater, which nobody actually is. And so you can't have your kind of, everything's getting better because yay civilization take, and then at the same time say women shouldn't wear makeup because it portends orgasm and people won't be able to work together in the office. It's like
forced monogamy reduces incels. That's
right, exactly. You can't. How do you have both of those takes at the same time with the same person? Either everything's biologically determined, or we are turning into some great, transhumanist singularity that's solving all the problems of the universe.
Yeah. And if you want to make a middle point, it's a lot harder to change these things than the left sometimes thinks it is, or there are costs that the left is not being honest about. We need to have that conversation, but let's not pretend that having that conversation is itself a moral evil in some way.
That's a good point.
Yeah, there's absolutely no proportionality, and that's what gives it away, that they're pushing for something else, right? This whole bowing down to biology, even when it's not accurately biology, it reminds me of people saying that it's unnatural for two men or two women to be attracted to each other because biologically we're not made like that. Something stupid like that. It seems like a repackaged form of conservatism that's being pushed, and this is kind of why I gravitated towards the atheist scene, because for me, rejecting religion, leaving behind religion as a woman, who grew up in Saudi Arabia, it came from pushing back against the status quo. It came from my progressivism. And then slowly, I got entangled in something that was really absolutely not doing that. In fact, it was just polishing up the same shit and and selling it back to you again. So when I see like ex-Muslims that have embraced Peterson, it is so sad to me that they are taking these traditional gender roles on now because this guy said it, not the imam in Saudi, but now this guy's selling it.
To be fair, they're just in accordance with Jungian archetypes. So, I mean, what are you going to do, right? So.
It's why we have a moral obligation, I think, to build alternative communities, to build spaces where people who share these interests can go when they don't want, if they're going to call us religion, then we'll call them religion back and say, like, when their people start to fall away from their dogmas, right? And if they have places to go, they're much more likely to move away from those things, I think, more effectively. So I think part of what we need to do that the intellectual dark web, I feel like, fails to do is provide a positive message to go along with a critique of other people, right? Something more than just clean your room is what I'm saying. Like, we need to,
especially when your room is fucking dirty.
Dirtier than a communist's, apparently.
There's actually Jordan Peterson in his room on video, filth all around him.
Have you seen the side by side with that in Sezik, where it's
his room is cleaner,
super clean?
Yeah, I want to tie this back to our earlier points about our critique of the coddling of the American mind, because it is that listening to perspectives that are maybe quiet right now, and you may have to shut up to be able to hear what they say, but you may have to step back. That's really missing from that. So if you've accepted a certain view of biology right now, and if you think about how that's not actually the same biology that existed 20 years ago, what we think about different sexual orientations is really different now. And even some, like Jordan Peterson concedes that these gay and lesbian people should live their lives, even though he questions their ability to parent their own children.
Right, exactly.
But see, even Jordan Peterson has developed or has taken on more contemporary views about human biology and human sexuality. But then it stops, right? Then it doesn't go any further. So if you notice, though, that this has developed, this has changed, then how are you stopping it from developing and changing further with sort of digging into your deterministic ideas? And that's where you have to listen to other people. That's where this sort of like, you have to recognize that this aggressive language around snowflakes and around you're being coddled is actually shutting people up from being able to teach you new perspectives.
I think that's a really great point, Katia, and I think it ties to what Matt was saying about the sort of focus on the Enlightenment view of truth. One of the other major things I see a lot in the fight between these groups is that they think that grievance studies are bad because they don't focus on empirical, quantifiable data. They focus on personal narratives. And like what you're describing, that kind of cultural change that happens often happens not because we get this new set of data that proves that gays are good if they get married or acceptable if they get married. It's that people see lived experiences and we get more of this accumulation of healthy lives being lived this way, and that changes people's perspective. And I think we need to be more willing to step up and defend and say that kind of truth is valuable truth. And it can be hard because a lot of us are often coming from places where that kind of argument is used to justify religious testimony. That can be very problematic. But I think that we have to be honest that the viewpoint that we can solve all of these problems without listening to personal testimony and without listening to lived experiences is itself, again, a kind of tribal narrative that blocks out large pieces of information.
Yeah. Okay, so on a sort of last note, what do you guys make generally about the rise of publications like Quillette, about the rise of people like Peterson, and about the fall of people like Milo? If you could just one by one let me know your thoughts.
I think there always has been and always will be a market for things that tell you what you want to hear, and that the way that you've always thought and always done things is actually the right way. And so I actually see Quillette as one big giant self-esteem booster
Ugh.
for the people that complain about the self-esteem coddling generation.
Yeah.
And so it's just
It's the
the
coddling,
same thing.
for
the
those
same thing
people.
with Jordan Peterson. It's like, you know what? You're a bro that loves working out in the gym, and that's like actually the greatest kind of person that there is. And and now you can, sit around and talk with other like-minded bros about how great it is and how terrible people that might want to live differently, are. So that's how I take that kind of thing. I see it as just, for those who used to be on top just by virtue of their, quote, identity, now aren't quite as on top as they once were. This is just a reaffirmation that, no, that was the way things should be. And so that's an attractive thing for those types. In terms of Milo, I think, obviously the Schadenfreude experience and seeing that he's broke is just, it's delicious. It's a chef's kiss moment. But it proves that deplatforming of not legitimate good faith, people that want to have a conversation, but just professional provocateurs who are grifters and want to raise money for themselves, deplatforming of people like that sometimes works. And if there's less Milo going around, that's better for everybody, conservative and progressive alike, I think. And so having institutions shut down that kind of grift strikes me as a good thing.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm wondering too about how the place of mainstream journalism can be both strengthened and improved, and how journalism itself can be improved. Because I don't think the answer, much as I sort of, from a free speech perspective, support the development and creation of fringe publications, we need, as a democratic society, we really need reliable, investigative, and serious journalism.
Yes.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what both y'all are saying. And I guess to tie it together, when I snicker at Quillet because I agree it is sort of it's a back patting machine. But there is a market for that sense of meaning and community, and so I think the role of journalism, the role of the left, the role of all of us is to create a functional alternative and continue to promote that alternative, and where possible, try to reach out to the people who are feeling an existential crisis and grab them before they get pulled into a different cult. Because, I don't think there's anything like living outside of tribalism. So you either give someone a healthy tribal narrative to work with, or that void will be filled by an unhealthy one.
Sure.
Yeah, and that's so true. It seems that even rejecting your traditional forms of tribalism does not make you immune to it, right? You just latch on to something else. If you've rejected religion in its official forms, you'll pick it up in its Sam Harris form or its Molyneux form. And are those better? I don't know.
And then, one thing I will add there is that, I do think some things are better and worse. We didn't get to talk about how, I do think that there are differences in values between the left and the right that are objective and, aren't going to be resolved just because people think that if everyone talks nicely enough, we'll all agree about these things. There are fundamental differences that we face that aren't getting better right now.
Right.
And I think that we do need to emphasize that. And so folks on the left need to stick to our guns, that the problem is not that we've gone too far in our beliefs. It's that we need to continue to modernize our messaging.
And when we push for that, that's when it can feel particularly unstable, right? Even though we might be making positive changes. Aaron sent me a good article by Ezra Klein, who was refuting one of these anti-SJWs, and the quote was this: "This speaks to a paradox of American politics. It often feels most stable when it is least just, and it often feels least stable when progress is being made." So yeah, when minorities are just shutting the fuck up and not pushing back, then it might, to someone on top of that hierarchy, it might feel like everything's stable because nobody's pushing for their rights.
Well, people think about today, it's worse than it's ever been. But if you think about summer of '68 or something, MLK is assassinated and RFK is assassinated and there are race riots and there are riots in the streets against Vietnam. I mean, most people, even the IDW, etc., are super happy that the social and cultural changes that were brought out of those movements have happened. But at the time, while they were pushing for the equal, all of the sort of civil rights legislation that LBJ passed, for example, it was tremendously chaotic and divisive. And
these would be the people that would be criticizing the people that were pushing for those changes.
Imagine if there had been Twitter during the March on Washington, right? Or the lunch counter sit-ins and things like this. I mean, it's in a way, thank God there wasn't Twitter then. But I think that's a great quote because I think our perspective certainly reflects that. I
just also wanted to point out that Ezra Klein, who had this conversation with Sam Harris a while back about race and IQ and Charles Murray, and he did a great job pushing back against him. And
he did.
If anyone hasn't heard it or read it, the transcript is up. You can check it out. I'll link it in the show notes. But it's funny because after this, I believe, Sam Harris, he went on to call Vox and Salon journalists people who have the same moral integrity as the KKK, moral and intellectual integrity, I believe.
That's ridiculous.
And he's called him far left, he's painted him as this really ridiculous, radical, hardcore lefty. And Ezra Klein is absolutely not that. In fact, he was saying to Haidt how he's a fan of his work and stuff. And he just sounds nothing like he's been painted. If you're listening to that echo chamber, you're not going to really have any idea of where people lie on the political spectrum because everyone is a far left lunatic.
Well, it's like how people on the right often trot out like Bill Maher as the example of this leftist that they want to, but this complete lack of awareness of where people actually fall on the spectrum.
Yeah,
I'm sure it affects both sides.
I used to be a big Bill Maher fan, and I had a lot of time for his critiques of religion, but slowly, as I've grown out of that sort of edgy phase, I've noticed that he's gotten worse, or I've gotten more aware, but his praising of Milo, his focus on SJWs, still in this climate, is just been appalling to me.
Context matters, like we said, and if you think with Trump being president that SJWs and campus anti-free speech quote movements are the problem. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah,
they're the symptom. They're not the cause. That's why I really like that Ezra Klein quote. Is that it's the intellectual dark web? I think puts the cart before the horse in claiming that it's the breakdown of civility that's leading to radicalization. When in fact the polarization is the thing that is happening in response to increasing problems that don't show up in their sort of better world metrics, as it were.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No, that's good.
Yeah. So any final thoughts, anyone?
It was lovely to meet you all.
This has been great.
Yeah, I'm happy to meet you all on the interwebs.
Yeah, it was lovely chatting with all of you. I'll just close with some ridiculous anti-SJW quotes I came across,
Excellent.
There was one that I saw on a Nuclear Takes account, I believe, where it said, some countries have ISIS, others have SJWs.
Okay.
Totally.
How many SJWs have thrown people off of academic buildings?
What's the level of military organization?
Yeah.
How
all these murder videos we keep putting out. Too.
Yeah.
That's one of the paradoxes that I love is that it's the Schrodinger's SJW who's simultaneously far too fragile to engage in any sort of conflict, but is an overwhelming threat as a person who will shout you down at any given moment. Which one is it?
Right.
Well, it's like the gender studies departments that can't even get a meeting with the vice president at the university, let alone funding, are also secretly running the entire academy in the world.
Are they too PC or are they too mean? and turning people into Nazis with their meanness. Which one is it?
That's true.
Yeah, then there was one that I came across. I would rather live in Hitler's Germany than Merkel's.
Oh my gosh.
Well,
You could just, yeah, go ahead.
you can go. You can actually go there and visit and find out.
Then there was one
It's
from
beyond absurd.
an ex-Muslim, unfortunately, that I got, like, who was saying that Islam is so bad. At least the Nazis were better because they were pro-science.
Say what you will about National Socialism, at least it's an ethos.
Yeah. So, okay, so
Happy dressers.
It's true. Really good fashion.
Yeah.
Architecture.
Well, Boss
Yeah.
designed their uniforms, right?
Speer knew his architecture.
I think I have 3 episodes on fascist fashion if you guys are interested, with ContraPoints. So,
I'm a big fan.
yeah. So, okay. Are Campus SJWs destroying Western civilization? Last thing I want you guys to answer.
What is Western civilization? Would be my postmodernist neo-Marxist answer.
Right. I mean, I think no, because Western civilization's going to beat them to it.
I'd say yes, in the sense that Western civilization is a curriculum for 19th century gentlemen, and SJWs are destroying it in the sense that we're no longer in the 19th century, and good academics reflect that.
I will see you outside, Mr. Darcy.
Yeah.
I can referee.
Wow, this took
Women
an
present at a
interesting turn.
duel. Excuse me?
All right, well, guys, it was lovely chatting with you all.
Thanks for having me.
To you.
Yeah, we'll chat again hopefully someday.
Yeah, thanks very much.
And best of luck in the coming weeks, Ina. This is
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
big
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah, lots of changes. I don't know
Yeah.
what's going to happen. My
Yeah, I
life
hear it
will
gets
be-
different from here on out.
Yeah, things change with the...
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank
It'll
you.
be a
though.
new civilization for you.
Definitely. And it's a
Western or
boy,
otherwise,
so
yeah.
I'm going to indoctrinate him with, feminism and all these,
Feed him lots of soy.
definitely.
Not allowed to
That's-
call him for the first couple of years. You know that, right?
Did you just assume his gender? Yeah. Okay. All right. This is all going to be like there for him to this is what I'm like, it's so strange because my kid can go back and listen to my opinions and it's just weird.
If it makes you feel better from what podcasting parents tell me, they won't. You don't have to worry.
Yeah,
Yes,
that's
They're
true.
never going to.
That's true. My
Yeah,
parents never listen, so
That's true.
yeah. All right, take care, guys.
Thanks for listening to another
Bye.
episode
Bye-bye.
of Polite Conversations. You can support this podcast by sharing the shit out of it, making some noise about it, or contributing via Patreon. Patreon.com/nice mangoes. No Ian Mangoes. Also, you can follow me on Twitter @nice mangoes. If you want to make a one-time donation instead of a monthly Patreon one, you can do so via PayPal. nicemangoes.blog@gmail.com. Remember, no Ian Mangoes. If you've got an interesting story and would potentially like to be a guest, you can email me there too.